Hello and welcome back to Alternate Shots, America's fastest growing podcast. I'm John Ellis. I'm the founder and editor of two Substack newsletters. One is called News Items. The other is called Political News Items. You can find them both at news-items.com.
I'm Richard Haass. I am the author of a single newsletter, Home and Away, also to be found on Substack. And let's get on with it, John.
So before we get to the meat, so to speak, I want to posit a hypothetical. There are 9 of us. We're on the tarmac, and there's a possibility that the plane is going to be shot down. The 9 of us are you, your longtime communications assistant, Iva Zorek, a number of your partners from Centerview, and myself and Dale, our producer. You get, as the leader of this group, you get into the catering container and move to a separate plane. You have the choice of 2 people to join you. Who would they be?
And just to specify, your wife and mine are not in the neighborhood?
No, they're on the they're with us. Yeah. So it's 11.
So John, I'm going to protect you now.
It's 11.
The threat would not be that the plane would be shot down. The threat will be that we do this podcast and you don't specifically say that you're going to protect your wife's life. I'm
not asking the question of me. I'm asking the question of you. I know what I would do.
Well, John, you've just made
I would protect the wives.
You're expendable, first of all.
Well, good to know. I figured.
John, you're the first to board the plane.
Let's just put it this way, Richard. Would Iva, who's the greatest communications, Eva, would Eva, the greatest communications person that I've ever met, would she get on the container truck?
Absolutely. I think my wife and Eva would get on the container cart with me. So
Dale and I get shot down, so to speak.
But I want you both to know that I'm going to miss you. And I'm not quite sure how I'll produce this podcast without either of you, certainly without Dale. John, I don't know. That might not be so hard.
Yeah, all right. Well, we have to move on. So on Monday,
yes, sir.
The memorandum of understanding.
No, John, I think before we get to that, I think we have to continue on this important story.
Yeah.
Which is, as I think just about everybody knows, the United States received threats of now controversial credibility or lack thereof, that there might be an attempt on the president's plane, which presumably at this point was the Qatari Air Force One rather than the Boeing, the original Air Force One. And to make a long story short, as you were saying, the president surreptitiously got off the plane, taking advantage of a catering cart. We've yet to learn, by the way, what else was on the catering cart or catering truck with several of his aides. What's interesting was who he left behind, including Stephen Miller and the secretaries of Treasury and State, which might make the next cabinet meeting a really interesting meeting in terms of where do people stand. He took the woman who does all of his posting.
The human printer.
Can't remember. I think he took Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, as he likes to call himself. And I think one other person, I can't remember.
Yeah, his communications director, right. Whose name is like Chong or something.
So Stephen Chong, yeah. And so it raises, and by the way, he didn't take his spokesperson, who's now his former spokesperson. And I don't know if that is simply coincidence or if there's actually a connection between the two. Lots of interesting things here in terms of not notifying the press and others that they were, if you will, being used as decoys. I also think it raises a slightly more serious question about whether the United States ought to be in the business of assassinating or targeting foreign officials and leaders. As we've seen in Iran, their successors may be worse. As we've seen with Iran, it can be difficult to negotiate in these circumstances. And as we also know, we actually operate a relatively open society. So it's not immediately obvious to me, at least, that it's in the comparative interest of the United States for targeted killings and assassinations to become more commonplace. I would think we are quite vulnerable, particularly now because we're living in an age of drones that can identify and target individuals. So I actually think this raises all sorts of issues going down the road beyond the specifics of not telling people they were a decoy and leaving several people in the chain of succession to the president of the United States in harm's and potentially in harm's way. I'd say there's one other serious issue here, which is reportedly, I could be wrong here, John, so correct me if I am, that the Israelis passed on this intelligence about the vulnerability of the plane because Israel is, shall we say, put itself in a controversial position because of the war and its role in advocating for this war in February. I expect that there will be some journalists looking into the Israeli intelligence that was passed along and how robust it is and whether it stands scrutiny. And I would just say the last thing, I'm not suggesting anything, I would just simply say the last thing this relationship needs right now are questions about the quality of the intelligence that was passed along. So that's what I have to say on this subject.
Well, to your point about an open society, I remember visiting with President George W. Bush shortly after 9/11, and we were talking, and we went out to walk the dogs about 9:30 at night, and we looked over, or he looked over, and there was a plane going into Reagan International, and he turned to me and said, "Do you know how long it would take for that plane to turn around and hit us?" And I said, "No." And he said, 1 minute and 20 seconds. So, add drones to that mix, and it's vulnerable, the White House is, let's put it that way.
There you go. Okay, now we can segue to Iran. I apologize for interrupting.
Well, the Memorandum of Understanding expires. That's a little bit of an overstatement, according to you, but it expires on August 17.
Yes.
The Secretary of the Treasury has adopted essentially the Haass position, which is blockade and strangle them as much as possible through sanctions and other means. Mm-hmm. What are the other means that would make economic life in Iran even more difficult than it already is?
Just to say first, I'll answer that. What the Secretary of the Treasury is doing is good, but I wish he had done it 5 or 6 months ago.
Right.
One, I think the administration made a massive error by making this a kinetic military operation rather than pressuring Iran economically at a time it was extraordinarily vulnerable under its previous leadership, and I believe might well have capitulated to many things we were interested in. Second of all, anytime you turn the economic screws tighter, that's a form of what is broadly known as coercive diplomacy. And that's all well and good. But anytime you coerce using economic tools or military tools or any tool, coercion leaves the side that you are pressuring in the position of deciding whether or when to say uncle. So economic coercion on Iran, we can tighten the screws and we can do it through the blockade. We can make it very difficult for Iran to sell oil and gas. We can introduce sanctions that would create secondary sanctions, if you will, against those who buy Iranian oil and gas. The so-called Lindsey Graham legislation has a version of that. If my memory serves me right, it would do it largely through tariffs, which is unfortunate. But my point is simply there are steps we can take to turn up the economic pressure on Iran. The question, though, is how their willingness to suffer pain. My sense is the priority for this Iranian leadership is not the welfare and comfort of the Iranian people. Those 90 million plus people are not their principal concern. So I think they could hold out for some time, particularly, by the way, they continue to be able to sell some energy. And at various times in this crisis, we've allowed them to sell some energy. So they put some money in their account. So we still get into the relative situation where who's better able to bear pain over time. And if we have the strait, not completely closed, but say 80% closed for another couple of months, and just the energy prices are where they are now or slightly higher, and the same holds for things that use energy for fertilizer and the rest, Where will inflation be? What will be the political effects here? And how willing is the president to pay that price? That's where we are. And by the way, it's a version of where we've been for some months, the military interactions notwithstanding.
I think we have the same conversation every week or so.
Yeah, the Groundhog Day quality. You're exactly right. And I hope we may not be the world's fastest or America's fastest growing podcast for long if people get tired of this conversation as to who's better positioned to hold out longer. But I think it does open up, John, the possibility, which is this goes on for some time, that the energy prices have gone up, but not nearly as dramatically as many predicted, large part because China is probably 5 million barrels a day of consumption down. Some others, including ourselves, have ramped up production. Pipelines are carrying a lot of oil. So the role of the Strait of Hormuz is more than a little diminished. So I think it opens up the possibility that a version of the status quo remains a version of the status quo a week from now or a month from now or 2 months. So I don't rule that out.
There's a story in the Wall Street Journal today. We're going to switch to Ukraine, but stay on warfare.
Okay.
There was a story in the Wall Street Journal today concerned a war game that took place in Germany. Yeah. And U.S. Army troops were there to do battle with Ukrainian drone operators. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the Ukrainian drone operators won. This gets to our theory that basically we should buy the Ukrainian drone operators, or at least have some private equity firm like, for instance, Centerview, acquire them and make them put them at the disposal of the U.S. government. Did this story strike you as stunning as it struck me?
Pretty stunning. Just correct the record. We are not a private equity firm. We're
I'm sorry.
Bank.
I'm sorry.
The Carlyles and Blackstones of the world would take umbrage at what you said. It is quite on one level. It's stunning. Even worse, John, it's not. What I think it highlights is what you and I think just about all of our listeners know, which is that the United States is almost generation or phases or something behind, that we still have a force posture that's very much configured for traditional wars. And Ukraine and Israel and others have moved on. And in this proliferation of relatively inexpensive, effective, unmanned systems. I mean, Ukraine is producing 6 million drones a year, plus or minus. Mm-hmm. And we can't. We have trouble producing 6,000 a year, or certainly 60,000 a year. We can't do. Even if we wanted to give Ukraine Patriots to shoot down these Russian missiles, we don't have them to give, and we can't produce them fast enough. We had. I mean, this is a scandal that crosses Democrats and Republicans, multiple administrations. It involves Congress, it involves the services, it involves the defense contractors, that we've essentially not modernized or adapted our military close to enough. So we're going to be playing catch up for a long time. And yeah, I think it's kind of, in the meantime, what you said facetiously isn't crazy. We ought to enter into some type of a relationship with Ukraine. I mean, for months, there were stories that this administration was resisting Ukraine's offers of help. That is nuts. We ought to be begging Ukraine to help. I think I remember reading about a month or 6 weeks ago, the Saudis entered into a deal with Ukraine.
Right.
But I think what you're going to be seeing is more and more countries doing that, whether it's Israel, Ukraine. If I were Taiwan, I'd be looking at this. But this is the new era of warfare. There's a revolution in military affairs. There were previous revolutions. For example, when highly accurate precision guidance munitions came along. Well, this is a major revolution in military affairs. And we are unfortunately playing catch up. We're not nimble at this kind of thing. There'll be a lot of cultural and political resistance. A lot of people are wedded to airplanes, big ships, and tanks and other sorts of equipment. And that's true of Congress, again, the contractors, as well as the services themselves. About a year ago, Eric Schmidt and I were having a conversation. Eric's been quite creative in this area, really important. with some of these startups. I remember somewhat sarcastically saying to him, maybe we've talked about it. If I'm repeating myself, I apologize, that we need 2 defense budgets. We need a traditional defense budget, say we make it 75%, 80% of what it currently is. And we need a new defense budget that essentially does all the innovative stuff and startups and drones and missiles that go after other missiles or ships or aircraft that are cheap and can be produced at scale. But I almost feel we need, if you will, a second Pentagon. And I think we're beginning to see, people are critical of Hegseth for good reason. We're beginning to see some signs of life in this Pentagon, not nearly enough, but some. Even the contractors. I read a piece the other day, John. I thought it was kind of curious that a lot of the big defense firms have basically become venture capital firms, and they are investing in all sorts of defense startups to get them to do this sort of stuff. So I think it's going to take time. It's going to take too long, but that's clearly where we're heading. But in the short run, yeah, we ought to franchise out some of our defense to Ukraine.
My theory, or my idea, I guess, is that we should take DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and make it Pentagon 2.0, and then, oversee this 20% that, takes $200 billion in the Pentagon's budget and, builds the fighting capability for the future. It seems to me like a reasonable thing to do. I will say Steve Feinberg, who is the, I think, Deputy Secretary of Defense, is trying very hard to sort of unglue the congressional military political complex, but that's turning around a battleship is very difficult.
Literally and figuratively, it's turning around a battleship. He also has the problem that reportedly in the press, his boss is throwing him under the bus.
Yeah.
Blaming him for the shortage. But what I haven't seen, John, is the urgency. I would think that this ought to be our top defense priority. If we're worried about what China could do against Taiwan, what Russia could do elsewhere in Europe, if we want to defend our partners in the Middle East against Iranian drones, which is something we have to do to protect the energy infrastructure, but also reduce Iranian leverage, we've got to come up with these systems. So I would say that this ought to be priority 1, 2, and 3 for the 5-sided building, and this ought to be the priority right now. And I don't, unless I missed it, I don't quite see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, the urgency is not there. The urgency is not there on the budget deficit, on the coming bankruptcy of Social Security and Medicare. You would think that people would be running around like chickens with their head cut off looking at this stuff. And it's like, well, we'll deal with it someday.
We're going up $2 billion a year. The politics make it almost impossible to deal with either side of the equation, the spending side or the tax side. There's several people out, or important voices out there, who are basically saying we don't need to worry because AI will lead to rates of economic growth that will be so high that while they won't reduce the size of the deficit, they will move the relationship or the ratio between the deficit and GDP in a desirable direction. But meantime, and you follow this closely, if one looks at the 10-year bonds, they're telling us something.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, what was it? Herbert Kahn, who once said that which can't go on forever won't. Or this is a version of, and the problem is this is going to go on until the afternoon it stops. And then we're going to be faced with some truly unpalatable realities and choices. But I just don't see in this political environment on either side the will to sit down and say, do a version of what was done, what was it, the early 80s on Social Security, a kind of bipartisan commission.
Right.
I just don't see the kind of political will on any side. And things are so divided and so toxic. Everyone's so scared they get hammered on social media or in their next primary. I just don't see it happening. So my guess is we're just going to simply wait until the crisis comes, and then we're going to have to deal with it on the worst possible terms.
I want to segue here to science, which I think it's safe to say this is an administration that is not funding scientific research to the degree that the U.S. has in the past. I think that's maybe an understatement. But this week was weird because the president seemed to latch on to the anti-vax movement. And particularly odd was the separation of the, what is it called? The
MMR,
MMR vaccine, which
measles,
now,
mumps, and rubella.
yeah, you can take it all at once in the way it is now. And now they want to separate it into, I guess, 3 separate trips to CVS or whatever. What do you make of that? I mean, it just seems, it given how busy people are,
Yep.
Going to your doctor or CVS 3 times instead of once just seems crazy.
Yeah. There's that. There's also the fact that we now have all this large amount of this vaccine, the 3-in-1. So what? The now manufacturers are going to have to start producing them separately. There's obviously a cost and a lag to that. Plus, several vaccines were removed from the recommended list of what kids ought to get. Look, it both reflects and reinforces a lot of the anti-vax politics that gained so much momentum during COVID-19. I defer to you on this. Let me just put it this way. There's no scientific evidence justifying any of this. The links with autism and all that are simply non-existent. So what I take on this, I tend not to ascribe motives, but I'm going to do it here. This seems to me, this is pure politics. And basically the president has alienated a chunk of his base because of the Iran war or some other issues. So he's now playing to one of the elements of his base and going into the anti-vax conspiracy crowd. And so I see this as a fairly desperate effort to garner some political support that's been falling off, but at a cost, because this will affect health and lives.
Yeah, the big problem the Republicans have going into the midterms, obviously, is the lack of enthusiasm of the R vote, of the red vote. You're looking at a situation where as many as 15% will either not vote at all, or blank Republican candidates if they do go to the polls and vote locally, obviously. Whereas Democratic enthusiasm is fever pitch. So one of the things I think the administration is trying to do is figure out what are the buttons to push that drive turnout for the midterms. And the way it is right now, if it goes this way, if where things stand now is where things stand on election day, then there will be a blue wave. It's just a question of how high.
John, were you surprised by events in Wisconsin when I think she was Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong lost in a very close race after the polls showed she had a pretty healthy lead? What's your reading of that in terms of both the dynamics between the left and the far left, and what it might mean for November?
I think the left obviously is insurgent, right? And they're riding a wave. They're riding a wave on Medicare for all. They're riding a wave on opposition to data centers, which is really sort of a proxy for opposition to the power of big tech.
Yeah.
They're riding a very strong wave of getting money, getting huge billionaire money, huge PAC money out of politics. There's Elon Musk has committed to spend, $40 million or $50 million in the main Senate race. And that hands the main Senate, Democratic Senate candidate the perfect issue, because he can go on TV and say they're trying to buy the election. And if you don't think they are, here's Elon Musk, he's spending $50 million. What do you think he's trying to do? He's trying to buy the election. That issue really worked very well with El Sayed in Michigan. It didn't really work for Francesca Hong, because the governor's race, it was intramural, and it wasn't like the other candidate had a lot of money or had a lot of corporate support. What got him over the finish line was the support of the incumbent governor. I thought that she was unlikely to win simply because of her stated position that Thanksgiving should not be observed, which, as long as you and I have been alive, Thanksgiving has featured the Green Bay Packers playing either the Chicago Bears or the Detroit Lions. In Wisconsin, that's about as close as it gets to Christmas Day, I guess. So now, unfortunately, this year the Packers are playing on Wednesday night, so maybe she knew that, but
I doubt it.
But I doubt it. And this, of course, led to the great headline, "Hung Jury."
Oh, nice.
There you go. Nice. So she almost won, but she came up short. Big break for the Democrats, because had she been the nominee, she would have certainly lost.
Okay. I'm working all the potential puns that could have been used about getting the stuffing out of her. A lot of dad jokes there. A lot of potential dad jokes. But we won't go there, John, because we will no longer be America's fastest growing podcast if we go down dad joke lane. So I will show some uncharacteristic discipline.
So we have one last thing to talk about, which is kudos to the New York Times for finally publishing an article on its op-ed pages suggesting that the president has to be much more forthcoming about his health.
I saw that.
And I thought one thing that amazes me about the press coverage since President Trump was inaugurated is that A, he's old, B, he looks awful, C, he obviously has, medical procedures conducted on him or administered to him, given the back of both hands and so on and so forth. His health is a serious issue, and yet it gets zero coverage in the press. It's astonishing.
And the double standard here, because there was, shall we say, justifiable vigilance about his predecessor. And to me, the question is less the president's physical state than the mental and emotional potential repercussions of that. And that's a totally legitimate area. That's not a partisan comment. Well, we all have a stake in any president's health, all aspects of it. So, yeah, I think it's, again, it's interesting. The idea of the president with their personal physician, when the personal physician how would I put it? It's almost like a Fed chair, ideally. You'd want the president's physician to be somebody who had the interests of the country as well as the individual. That wasn't someone who would sort of fudge everything or hide everything because he's protecting his patient. And what we have is, and it's grown up over the years, is the White House physician has become too much the president's personal physician. And this didn't get invented by Donald Trump, though like most other things, it gets taken to a new level. But as a result, the rest of us are left, shall we say, unprotected.
It's funny because when I first started covering politics, the rule was that the president, had the annual physical. The results of the physical were shared with Dr. Lawrence Altman of the New York Times. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Altman would report on, write up a report on the president's health. He would leave out stuff that was not, germane. Uh-huh. But that worked for a long time. I mean, that was the way you had an independent confirmation of the president's physical. And somehow it just went away.
Yet another norm that has been shattered. It's good you're sitting down, John, because we haven't seen a whole lot of that. So it's good. It's good you're in a comfortable position.
So I wanted to talk about one other thing, which is we've heard a lot about transitioning and transgender politics and stuff. And I was thinking that, had LeBron James not signed with the Philadelphia 76ers, he might have transitioned and become LeBron James and dominated the WNBA. I know you're a big fan of the WNBA. Why are you a big fan of the WNBA if LeBron James is not playing in that league?
Well, this will make us either America's fastest growing or fastest shrinking podcast. We'll find out. We'll find out in not that much time. Look, I like watching the WNBA games to a point. There's a lot of offensive talent. I'm old enough to remember when girls basketball had all sorts of limits on how much they could dribble and which side of the court they could play on. And now women's basketball, girls and women's basketball is essentially the same thing. though there's considerably less defense than there is in the men's game. But watching teams like the Indiana Fever, which is what most of America is watching to the extent they watch the WNBA, is fantastic. You've got several great players, including, but not only, Caitlin Clark, and the shooting, the passing, the running game. It's really enjoyable. What is stunning about the WNBA, one, is that you're getting at the transgender politics of it. The idea that you would allow people who have transitioned to play there, I think, is just crazy and physically dangerous. And one of the players on the Indiana Fever, Sophie Cunningham, has said as much. And she said, this is just common sense. I tend to think she's right, but this has become a cause celeb. What's really also interesting is the officiating in WNBA. They are allowing several players, including Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham, to get mauled on the court. The degree of the severity and frequency of the fouls is quite stunning. And I don't get it, because to the extent we're talking about the WNBA and people are watching it, it's because of teams like the Indiana Fever. Caitlin Clark has, almost like with Tiger Woods, in some ways, mainstream golf for a lot of Americans. You could choose your athlete. Maybe it was Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali in boxing. They kind of brought a whole larger crowd into the sport. Caitlin Clark has done that for women's basketball.
Yes, she has.
And the potential for salaries to go up, for television contracts to be at a different order of magnitude is because of her. And the idea that she would be severely or permanently injured beyond the personal tragedy to her, it's nuts. There's no better way for this sport to get mainstreamed in a accelerated fashion. So I don't understand the way she and others are being treated. I'm not going to go into all the analyses about race and other things, but it just seems to me the officiating is woefully inadequate, and the commissioner either needs to step up or step aside.
Yeah.
But this is increasingly a game and a league out of control. And what I don't get it is it's going to do itself in just at a time it ought to be taking off.
Yeah. It's a little bit like professional hockey, where, the fighting was sort of part of the show. And a lot of the purists were like, why do we have this as a part of the show? And the play is so extraordinary.
Yeah, I agree. This is why Olympic hockey to me is often better than professional hockey, because it's more of a skating game rather than such a, if you will, physical game. It's too bad we've run out of time, John. I will spare you my experience at Wingfoot this week, but I had a great morning at Wingfoot, which is a majestic palace for golf.
Did you play the East or the West course?
I played the West course, the famed where 6 U.S. Opens have been played.
Uh-huh.
I played respectably.
How'd you do on 18?
Bogey. I did better than Phil Mickelson.
There you go.
I missed my par putt and got a bogey. So take that, Phil.
There you go. Well, on one last golf note, our good friend Tim Haggerty was the medalist in the qualifier for the mid-amateur USGA tournament, which will be played this year at Sand Valley in Wisconsin. And Tim is a great, great guy, great golfer. And he missed qualifying for the U.S. Open, I think 2 or 3 years ago, when he lipped out a putt on the 18th green at Sleepy Hollow, which is where he and his father are members. So we wish good luck to Tim.
Absolutely.
And we thank you all for listening. And thank you to our great producer, Dale Eisinger. When we post these on our separate newsletters, we include a link to Dale. So thank you, Dale. Thank you, Richard. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, John. Enjoy the last 25% of summer.